I watched my parents hand my older brother Jake a vintage Rolex at my 24th birthday dinner, while I sat there empty-handed. The gold watch belonged to our grandfather, and my father explained it represented family responsibility and leadership qualities that Jake possessed. My mother nodded approvingly as Jake fastened the timepiece around his wrist, neither parent acknowledging my presence at my own birthday celebration. 24 years of being invisible in my own family crystallized in that moment. I excused myself, packed my belongings, and disappeared into the night. Growing up in our suburban Cleveland household, I learned early that being Jake's younger brother meant existing in permanent shadow. While he dominated every conversation at our mahogany dining table with tales of touchdown passes and honor roll achievements, I sat quietly picking at my food, waiting for someone to ask about my day. That question never came. Jake was 18 months older, 6 feet 2 inches tall, with sandy blonde hair, and our father's commanding presence. He quarterbacked our high school football team to 3 consecutive regional championships while maintaining a 4.0 grade average. College recruiters filled our living room every weekend, discussing full-ride scholarships and academic honors programs. Meanwhile, I spent afternoons in the basement with my keyboard and recording equipment, creating instrumental tracks and learning sound engineering techniques through online tutorials. When I tried sharing my musical accomplishments, my parents dismissed my efforts as noise pollution. My mother would sigh dramatically and suggest I find more productive hobbies like Jake's debate team participation or student government activities. My father, Robert, owned a successful accounting firm and constantly praised Jake's natural business instincts while ignoring my creative talents entirely. The systematic neglect reached devastating heights during my senior year. Jake played in the state championship basketball game on the same day as my high school graduation. Without discussion, my parents chose his game over my ceremony. I walked across that stage alone, watching classmates celebrate with proud families while my empty seats remained vacant. The principal handed me my diploma with sympathetic eyes, clearly aware of my family's absence. That summer, I received acceptance letters from 3 prestigious audio engineering programs. Nashville Institute of Production and Engineering offered me a partial scholarship based on portfolio submissions, showcasing my instrumental compositions and mixing techniques. I burst into our kitchen, waving the acceptance letter, finally believing I had achieved something worthy of recognition. My parents barely glanced up from discussing Jake's business administration program at Ohio State University. "Music school is expensive nonsense, Lucas," my father declared, returning his attention to Jake's course catalog. "Your brother needs our financial support for legitimate education that will lead to real career opportunities." My mother added salt to the wound by suggesting I consider community college courses that might prepare me for entry-level positions at Robert's accounting firm. The idea of spending my life organizing tax documents and financial statements made my stomach churn. I had discovered my passion and talent for audio production, but my parents refused to see value in creative pursuits. I worked construction jobs through college to pay for my education independently. While Jake enjoyed fraternity parties and spring break trips funded by our parents' generosity, I mixed concrete and carried lumber to afford textbook costs and studio rental fees. My hands developed calluses from manual labor, but my technical skills grew stronger with each project I completed. After graduation, I established a modest freelance music production business from my 1-bedroom apartment. Local indie bands hired me to record their demos, and wedding musicians sought my services for live sound mixing. My reputation spread through Cleveland's underground music scene, leading to regular weekend gigs at coffee shops and small venues. I earned enough money to cover rent and equipment upgrades while building a portfolio of satisfied clients. My parents remained oblivious to my professional success. Family dinner conversations revolved exclusively around Jake's accounting firm internship and his engagement to Madison, a blonde sorority president who shared his ambitious social climbing tendencies. When I mentioned landing a contract with a regional country artist planning to record in Nashville, my mother changed the subject to Madison's wedding planning progress. The pattern continued relentlessly through my early 20s. Jake received our parents' undivided attention, emotional support, and financial backing for every venture, while I remained an afterthought in my own family. Birthday celebrations focused on Jake's achievements from the previous year, rather than acknowledging my personal milestones. Christmas gifts reflected the disparity clearly. Jake unwrapped expensive electronics and luxury clothing, while I received generic gift cards purchased last minute from grocery store checkout lines. Last year's Thanksgiving dinner epitomized our family dynamic perfectly. Jake announced his promotion to senior associate at a prestigious accounting firm, earning applause and champagne toasts from our parents. When I shared news about producing an album that reached number 15 on regional country charts, my father asked me to pass the cranberry sauce without acknowledging my accomplishment. The birthday incident became my breaking point because of its calculated cruelty. Our grandfather's Rolex represented family heritage and parental approval symbols I had craved my entire life. Watching my parents bestow those honors on Jake while treating my presence as coincidental proved that 24 years of hoping for recognition had been futile self-deception. But the real revelation came later that evening when I was packing my belongings into cardboard boxes. Hidden beneath old textbooks and sheet music in my storage closet, I discovered a plastic container filled with family photographs spanning our childhood years. As I flipped through the images, a disturbing pattern emerged that explained everything about my family's treatment. In photograph after photograph, I noticed deliberate positioning that minimized my presence while highlighting Jake's prominence. Christmas morning pictures showed Jake front and center unwrapping presents, while I appeared partially cropped from frame edges or obscured behind furniture. Family vacation snapshots featured Jake posing confidently in foreground locations, while I stood in background positions often blurred or cut off entirely. One particular photograph stopped my breath completely. The image showed me at age 12, holding a trophy and wearing a formal concert outfit. I remembered that day vividly, winning first place at the regional young musicians competition with my piano performance of Chopin's Minute Waltz. The achievement had meant everything to me, representing validation of countless practice hours and natural musical talent. Yet when I had returned home that evening, trophy in hand, and bursting with pride, my parents claimed complete ignorance about the competition. They insisted they had no memory of signing permission slips or driving me to the performance venue. My mother suggested I was confused about the event details, while my father questioned whether the trophy actually belonged to me. Now staring at photographic proof of that forgotten achievement, I understood the full scope of their systematic erasure of my accomplishments. This wasn't mere favoritism or unconscious neglect. My parents had deliberately chosen to eliminate evidence of my successes while constructing a false narrative where Jake alone possessed talent and potential. I carefully placed the photographs in my suitcase, knowing they represented the final proof I needed to sever ties with people who had spent 24 years convincing me I was invisible. Tomorrow, I would drive toward a new life where my worth wasn't measured against my brother's manufactured perfection. The drive to Nashville took 7 hours through winding interstate highways that carried me toward the only place where I had ever felt truly understood. Music City welcomed dreamers and underdogs, people who believed passion could overcome pedigree, and talent could triumph over family connections. I had visited twice during college for recording conferences, falling in love with the creative energy that pulsed through every honky-tonk bar and recording studio. My first week in Tennessee taught me lessons about independence that 24 years in Cleveland had never provided. I rented a furnished efficiency apartment 3 blocks from Music Row, paying first month's rent with money saved from freelance production work. The neighborhood hummed with constant activity session musicians carrying guitar cases between studios, songwriters scribbling lyrics on coffee shop napkins, and sound engineers discussing mixing techniques over breakfast. Finding employment proved easier than expected due to my technical credentials and portfolio of completed projects. Meridian Recording Studios hired me for weekend shifts handling live session work, while Creative Sound Solutions offered weekday evening hours mixing promotional materials for local artists. Both positions paid decent wages and provided access to professional-grade equipment that far exceeded my home studio capabilities. My supervisor at Meridian, a gruff 40-something engineer named Tommy Richardson, recognized my technical skills immediately during my first recording session with a bluegrass quintet from Kentucky. While other assistants struggled with microphone placement and soundboard configurations, I anticipated the musicians' needs and adjusted recording levels instinctively. Most kids your age think they know everything about music production because they downloaded some software, Tommy told me after the session. You actually understand sound dynamics and instrument acoustics. That's rare talent worth developing. Working alongside seasoned professionals challenged me to expand my technical knowledge while learning business aspects of music production that college courses had never covered. I discovered how producers negotiate contracts with record labels, how engineers balance competing artistic visions during collaborative sessions, and how studio owners maintain relationships with both established artists and emerging performers. The musicians themselves became my greatest teachers and first real friends in Nashville. Unlike my family's dismissive attitude toward creative pursuits, these artists respected technical expertise and valued collaborative partnerships. Guitarists sought my advice on amplifier settings, vocalists trusted my recommendations for microphone selection, and drummers relied on my skills to capture their rhythmic precision accurately. Sarah Martinez entered my life during a late October recording session with her indie folk band Wildwood Creek. She possessed a soprano voice that could convey heartbreak and hope within the same melodic phrase, accompanied by finger-picking guitar techniques that showcased years of classical training. But her musical talents were matched by genuine warmth and intellectual curiosity that made our conversations extend far beyond professional topics. After finishing her band's demo recording, Sarah lingered in the studio while I organized equipment and backed up digital files. She asked thoughtful questions about my technical process and shared stories about her journey from small-town Texas to Nashville's competitive music scene. Unlike the superficial interactions that characterize my family relationships, our conversation revealed mutual respect and authentic interest in each other's perspectives. "You have incredible ears for mixing," she told me as I locked up the studio that evening. "Most engineers just push faders around until something sounds decent. You actually listen to what the song needs and enhance the emotional content." Sarah became my guide to Nashville's vibrant social scene, introducing me to songwriter circles, acoustic open mic nights, and informal jam sessions that took place in various apartments and coffee shops throughout the city. For the first time in my life, I belonged to a community that celebrated individual contributions rather than ranking people in competitive hierarchies. Our romantic relationship developed gradually through shared musical interests, and countless hours spent discussing everything from recording techniques to philosophical questions about art and creativity. Sarah appreciated my quiet thoughtfulness, while I admired her fearless pursuit of musical expression, despite industry pressures to conform to commercial expectations. By Christmas, we were spending most evenings together, either working on her new songs in my apartment or exploring Nashville's rich musical history through visits to legendary venues like the Grand Ole Opry and historic recording studios on Music Row. Sarah helped me understand that my family's rejection reflected their limitations rather than my inadequacies. "You know what I love about your story?" she asked one evening as we walked through Centennial Park after attending a concert featuring emerging country artists. "You never let their dismissiveness kill your passion for music. Most people would have given up and chosen safer paths to gain approval." My freelance business expanded rapidly through word-of-mouth referrals from satisfied clients. Local country artists hired me to produce their independent album releases, while rock bands sought my services for live concert mixing. I invested profits in upgraded recording equipment and professional grade monitors that enhanced my technical capabilities significantly. The work challenged me creatively while providing financial stability that exceeded my expectations. Nashville's music industry offered numerous opportunities for talented individuals willing to work hard and build professional reputations through consistent quality output. I discovered that technical expertise combined with reliable work ethic created demand that kept my calendar booked weeks in advance. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts and value my contributions without seeking external validation. Growing up in Jake's shadow had taught me to question my worth and downplay my achievements. But Nashville's music community responded positively to competence and creativity, rewarding merit rather than family connections or social status. 2 weeks after my birthday departure from Cleveland, my peaceful new existence was shattered by 17 missed calls from my father. Robert's voicemails escalated from casual requests for conversation to increasingly frantic demands that I call him immediately regarding urgent family matters. His final message left at 2:30 in the morning contained panic that I had never heard in his voice before. "Lucas, you need to come home right now. Jake is in serious trouble with the law, and we need your help. The business is in jeopardy, and I don't know what to do. Please call me back as soon as you get this message. We made mistakes, son, and we need you." The irony was overwhelming. After spending my entire life begging for my father's attention and respect, he was now desperately trying to reach me because Jake's perfect facade had finally cracked. But his timing couldn't have been worse. I had just begun building the independent life I had always dreamed of having, surrounded by people who valued my talents and supported my ambitions. I stared at my phone for 20 minutes before deciding to return his call, knowing that whatever crisis had befallen my family would test every boundary I had worked so hard to establish. When I finally called my father back, his voice carried a trembling desperation that immediately told me Jake's troubles went far beyond typical family drama. Robert spoke in fragmented sentences, struggling to explain how his golden son had somehow brought federal investigators to their accounting firm and destroyed the family business he had spent 30 years building. "The FBI raided our offices yesterday morning," my father whispered, as if speaking quietly might minimize the severity of the situation. "They seized all our computers' client files and financial records. Jake has been arrested for embezzling money from client accounts, Lucas. They're saying he stole over $200,000 from retirement funds belonging to elderly clients." The numbers felt surreal. Jake had always lived comfortably, but $200,000 represented more money than most people earned in several years of honest work. I pressed my father for details about when the theft had occurred and how long Jake had been manipulating client accounts without detection. "We don't know exactly when it started," Robert admitted. "The investigators are still analyzing financial records going back 18 months. Jake had access to client accounts because I trusted him to handle investment transfers and retirement planning services. I never imagined he would steal from vulnerable people who depended on our firm for their financial security." My mother's voice joined the conversation on speakerphone, her words broken by intermittent sobs that conveyed the complete collapse of everything she believed about our family's respectability. Susan had built her social identity around being the wife of a successful businessman and mother of accomplished sons. Jake's criminal behavior threatened to destroy her carefully maintained community standing. "We need you to come home and help us figure out how to save the business," she pleaded through her tears. "You have business training and you understand financial systems. Maybe you can work with the investigators and help us prove that we didn't know what Jake was doing." Their desperation revealed everything I needed to understand about my family's true priorities. For 24 years, my parents had dismissed my achievements and ignored my potential. But now that their preferred son had proven himself to be a criminal who endangered their financial stability and social reputation, they suddenly remembered my existence and expected me to solve problems that Jake had created. I told them I would research the situation and decide whether to return to Cleveland, but I made no commitments about providing assistance. My father begged me to come home immediately, insisting that family loyalty required me to support them during their crisis. I ended the call without agreeing to anything, knowing that hasty emotional decisions would only recreate the dysfunction I had worked so hard to escape. Instead of rushing back to rescue my family, I spent the next 3 days conducting thorough research about Jake's legal situation and the charges he was facing. Federal embezzlement cases typically involved substantial evidence and lengthy investigations before arrests were made. If the FBI had already seized business records and arrested Jake, prosecutors likely possessed overwhelming proof of his criminal activity. Online searches revealed that local Cleveland newspapers were covering the scandal extensively. The Plain Dealer had published a front-page story describing how Jake Mitchell Thompson had allegedly stolen money from elderly clients' retirement accounts to fund a gambling addiction and expensive lifestyle far beyond his legitimate income. According to court documents, he had manipulated investment portfolios and withdrawal authorizations to redirect client funds into personal accounts he controlled. The article included quotes from several victims who had entrusted my father's firm with their life savings. Margaret Wilson, a 78-year-old widow, discovered that $30,000 intended for her grandson's college education had disappeared from her account. Harold Stevens, an 82-year-old retiree, learned that his entire retirement fund had been depleted to cover gambling debts that Jake had accumulated at various Ohio casinos. But the most shocking revelation came from additional online research that exposed Jake's secret double life. Public records showed that he had purchased a luxury apartment in downtown Cleveland's most expensive district, far beyond what a junior accountant could afford on legitimate salary income. Vehicle registration databases revealed he owned a $70,000 BMW and a $45,000 motorcycle, neither of which he had ever mentioned during family gatherings. Credit reporting websites indicated that Jake had accumulated massive gambling debts at multiple casinos across Ohio and neighboring states. Financial institutions had filed judgments against him for unpaid loans totaling more than $80,000. His lifestyle required approximately $15,000 per month in expenses, while his official salary from our father's firm provided less than $4,000 monthly income. The mathematical impossibility of Jake's financial situation should have raised obvious questions for any competent accountant, but our father had apparently chosen willful blindness over acknowledging his favorite son's criminal behavior. Robert had given Jake access to client accounts without implementing proper oversight or audit procedures that would have detected theft quickly. As I dug deeper into public records and court filings, I discovered evidence that our parents had been enabling Jake's destructive behavior for years before the embezzlement began. Property records showed that Robert and Susan had co-signed multiple loans for Jake's luxury purchases, including his expensive vehicles and downtown apartment lease. They had also paid off several gambling debts that casinos had referred to collection agencies. But the most devastating discovery came when I accessed probate court records related to our grandmother's estate. Eleanor Thompson had died 4 years earlier, leaving a detailed will that included specific provisions for both Jake and me. According to the legal documents, she had bequeathed $50,000 directly to me, plus valuable stock holdings that were intended to fund my education and career development. I remembered asking my parents about grandmother's will after her funeral, wondering if she had left anything that might help with my college expenses. Robert had told me that Eleanor's modest estate barely covered her medical bills and funeral costs, leaving no inheritance for grandchildren. My mother had supported this lie, claiming that grandmother had never accumulated significant wealth during her lifetime. Now I held legal proof that my parents had stolen my inheritance and used the money to enable Jake's gambling addiction and criminal lifestyle. The $50,000 that grandmother had intended to support my dreams had instead funded the very behavior that ultimately led to Jake's arrest for stealing from innocent elderly victims. Court records revealed additional fraud that extended beyond the stolen inheritance. Documents showed that my parents had established a college savings account for me during my childhood, contributed to by various relatives and family friends who wanted to support my education. Instead of preserving those funds for their intended purpose, Robert and Susan had withdrawn the money to pay for Jake's graduate school tuition and luxury expenses. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic financial abuse that had lasted for years. My parents had not simply favored Jake over me through emotional neglect and social dismissiveness. They had actively stolen money that belonged to me and used it to support his destructive behavior while lying about the theft to my face. I called my lawyer friend from college, who now practiced family law in Memphis, explaining the situation and asking for advice about my legal options. Jennifer Walsh had graduated magna cum laude from law school and specialized in cases involving financial fraud and family disputes. Lucas, what your parents did constitutes both civil and criminal fraud, Jennifer explained during our phone consultation. Stealing inheritance money and redirecting funds from educational accounts without consent can result in felony charges. You have strong grounds for lawsuits that could recover the stolen money plus substantial damages. She recommended that I gather all available documentation and meet with a Cleveland attorney who could file appropriate legal motions to protect my rights. Jennifer warned me that my parents would likely pressure me to forgive the theft and avoid legal action in the name of family loyalty. But she emphasized that forgiveness should only come after full restitution and accountability. Armed with this information, I realized that returning to Cleveland would not be a mercy mission to help desperate parents. Instead, it would be a reckoning that forced my family to face consequences for decades of lies, theft, and favoritism that had finally culminated in criminal behavior that destroyed innocent people's financial security. Jennifer referred me to Patrick Donnelly, a Cleveland attorney who specialized in financial fraud cases and had successfully prosecuted similar family disputes involving stolen inheritance and educational funds. Patrick agreed to meet with me immediately, recognizing that time was critical for preserving evidence and protecting my legal rights before my parents could destroy additional documentation. During our initial consultation in his downtown Cleveland office, Patrick reviewed the probate records and banking documents I had collected through online research. His examination revealed that the fraud against me was even more extensive than I had initially discovered. Court filings showed that grandmother Eleanor had also established a trust fund containing valuable stock holdings from her late husband's manufacturing company holdings that had appreciated significantly over the 20 years since grandfather's death. Your grandmother specifically designated these investments for your career development and future financial security, Patrick explained, pointing to relevant passages in the trust documents. The stocks are now worth approximately $120,000 money that should have been transferred to your control when you turned 21. Instead of honoring grandmother's wishes, my parents had liquidated the stock holdings and used the proceeds to cover Jake's mounting gambling debts and expensive lifestyle purchases. Bank records showed regular transfers from the trust account to cover casino markers, luxury car payments, and credit card bills that Jake had accumulated during his years of financial irresponsibility. Patrick also discovered that my parents had forged my signature on documents that legally designated Jake as the primary beneficiary of grandmother's estate, effectively stealing my inheritance through fraudulent paperwork. The forgeries were sophisticated enough to fool bank officials initially, but forensic document analysis would easily prove that the signatures were not authentic. This isn't just civil fraud. Lucas, Patrick warned, what your parents did constitutes multiple felonies, including forgery theft and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. If you decide to pursue criminal charges, they could face prison sentences. While Patrick gathered legal evidence, I focused on expanding my music production business to ensure financial stability during the upcoming legal battle. My reputation in Nashville's recording community had grown significantly since arriving 2 months earlier, leading to opportunities with more established artists and higher-paying projects. Tommy Richardson offered me a full-time position at Meridian Recording Studios, with benefits and profit-sharing arrangements that reflected my proven technical skills and reliable work ethic. The promotion would provide steady income while allowing flexibility for legal proceedings and court appearances in Ohio. Sarah supported my decision to pursue justice against my family, understanding that unresolved financial crimes would continue affecting our relationship if left unaddressed. She had grown up in a household where both parents worked honest jobs to provide for their children, and she found my family's theft morally reprehensible. You can't build a healthy future while people who claim to love you continue stealing from you, she told me during one of our evening walks through the Gulch District. If you don't hold them accountable now, they'll find new ways to exploit and manipulate you for the rest of your life. The legal process moved quickly due to the extensive documentation available through public records and banking institutions. Patrick filed preliminary motions to freeze my parents' assets and prevent them from destroying evidence related to the inheritance theft and educational account fraud. Court orders required Robert and Susan to provide complete financial records dating back 10 years, including all transactions involving my grandmother's estate and college savings accounts. My parents' initial response came through their hastily hired attorney, who contacted Patrick with an offer to settle the matter privately without court proceedings. They proposed returning the original $50,000 inheritance amount without interest or damages, hoping to avoid criminal charges and public exposure of their fraudulent behavior. Patrick advised me to reject their settlement offer as inadequate compensation for years of systematic theft and emotional abuse. The stolen money had accumulated interest and investment returns that my grandmother had intended for my benefit. Moreover, settling quickly would send the message that financial fraud within families carries no serious consequences. They're hoping you'll accept partial restitution to avoid embarrassing them publicly, Patrick explained, but they stole over $200,000 when you factor in the trust fund stock's college savings and accumulated investment returns. They need to face full accountability for what they've done. During this same period, Jake's legal troubles escalated dramatically when federal prosecutors filed additional charges related to his embezzlement scheme. Court documents revealed that he had stolen nearly $300,000 total from multiple client accounts, using sophisticated computer skills to manipulate financial records and cover his tracks temporarily. But the most shocking development came when my mother called me in tears, revealing that Jake had disappeared with additional stolen money that had been held in evidence accounts pending his trial. Federal marshals had issued a nationwide warrant for his arrest after discovering he had somehow accessed another $100,000 from the accounting firm's operating accounts and fled Cleveland without notifying his bail bondsman. "He's gone, Lucas." Susan sobbed into the phone. "The FBI came to our house looking for him, and they think he might be trying to flee the country. They seized our passports and froze our bank accounts because they believe we helped him escape with the money." The irony was devastating. My parents had sacrificed everything to protect and enable Jake's criminal behavior, only to have him abandon them completely when his situation became desperate. While they faced potential criminal charges for inheritance fraud and possible conspiracy to help Jake flee justice, their golden son had chosen self-preservation over family loyalty. Robert called me later that evening, his voice broken by the complete collapse of everything he had worked to build during his 40-year career. The accounting firm would permanently close due to criminal liability and destroyed reputation. Their house was being foreclosed because they had borrowed against its value to cover Jake's previous gambling debts. Their retirement savings had been liquidated to pay legal fees and restitution to embezzlement victims. I know we failed you, Lucas. My father admitted for the first time in 24 years. We were so focused on protecting Jake that we never saw how much damage we were causing to our family and to innocent people who trusted us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm begging you to loan us money for legal fees so we can avoid prison sentences. The request stunned me with its audacious selfishness. After stealing my inheritance, lying about grandmother's wishes, and enabling criminal behavior that destroyed elderly people's retirement security, my parents now expected me to fund their legal defense against charges related to crimes they had committed against me personally. Patrick had warned me that this moment would come when my parents would try to exploit my compassionate nature and sense of family obligation to avoid facing consequences for their actions. He emphasized that providing financial assistance would be both legally unwise and emotionally destructive. I told my father that I could not help them financially while pursuing legal action to recover the money they had stolen from me. If they wanted to demonstrate genuine remorse for their behavior, they could begin by providing complete financial records and cooperating fully with restitution efforts. Robert responded with anger that revealed his continued sense of entitlement and refusal to accept responsibility for the crisis he had created. He accused me of being vindictive and heartless for pursuing legal action against family members during their most vulnerable period. He claimed that my lawsuit was tearing apart our family and destroying any hope of reconciliation. But his words no longer carried emotional power over me. Nashville had taught me that healthy relationships were built on mutual respect and genuine support, not manipulation and exploitation disguised as family loyalty. My real family now consisted of Sarah Tommy and the creative community that valued my contributions and encouraged my growth. 3 weeks later, I returned to Cleveland, not as the ignored son seeking approval, but as a confident adult accompanied by legal representation and documented evidence of years of financial fraud committed against me. Patrick had arranged for the confrontation to take place in my childhood home, believing that familiar surroundings would prevent my parents from maintaining the emotional detachment they might achieve in formal legal settings. I arrived at the house on Maple Street carrying a briefcase filled with court documents, banking records, and forensic evidence that proved my parents' systematic theft of money grandmother Eleanor had intended for my future. The Victorian-style house looked smaller than I remembered, its white paint peeling and front garden overgrown with weeds that reflected the family's deteriorating circumstances. My mother answered the door wearing clothes that showed the strain of recent months. Susan had always maintained impeccable appearance as part of her social identity, but now her hair appeared unkempt, and her face showed signs of sleepless nights and constant stress. She hugged me desperately as if physical contact might restore our relationship to some fictional past, when family bonds had actually existed. "Thank God you came home, Lucas," she whispered, clinging to me with surprising strength. "We've missed you so much, and we need to work together to get through this terrible situation." Robert emerged from his home office looking older than his 62 years, shoulders bent under the weight of professional disgrace and financial ruin. The man who had commanded respect in Cleveland's business community now faced criminal charges and civil lawsuits that would consume whatever remained of his life's work. We gathered in the same dining room where they had humiliated me on my birthday 3 months earlier. The mahogany table that had hosted so many celebrations of Jake's achievements now served as the setting for a reckoning that would finally address decades of favoritism and fraud. Patrick spread legal documents across the table's polished surface, creating a visual representation of evidence that supported multiple felony charges against both parents. The paperwork included grandmother's original will, forged signature documents, banking records showing stolen funds, and investment statements proving the current value of misappropriated assets. Your clients face serious criminal exposure. Patrick addressed their attorney Harold Martinez, whom they had hired to negotiate settlement terms. We have documented proof of inheritance fraud forgery conspiracy to commit theft and tax evasion related to unreported asset transfers. The total amount stolen exceeds $250,000 when we include accumulated investment returns. Harold reviewed the evidence methodically, occasionally glancing at my parents with expressions that conveyed his assessment of their legal vulnerability. After 20 minutes of silent examination, he requested private consultation with Robert and Susan to discuss their options for avoiding criminal prosecution. During their absence, I studied the dining room that had witnessed so many painful family interactions. The walls displayed dozens of photographs celebrating Jake's accomplishments, football trophies, academic awards, graduation pictures, and professional achievements. Not a single image acknowledged my existence or documented any of my personal milestones. When my parents returned with their attorney, their faces showed resignation to the reality that their lies and theft had finally created consequences they could not manipulate or deny. Harold informed Patrick that his clients were prepared to negotiate full restitution in exchange for avoiding criminal charges, but they needed time to liquidate assets and arrange payment schedules. My clients acknowledged that mistakes were made regarding the inheritance distribution, Harold said carefully. They're committed to making Lucas whole financially, but they're requesting reasonable payment terms given their current circumstances. I stood up from the table and looked directly at my parents for the first time since entering their house. The power dynamic that had defined our family relationships for 24 years had shifted completely. They were no longer the successful authority figures who could dismiss my achievements and ignore my needs. Instead, they were criminal defendants hoping to avoid prison sentences for crimes they had committed against their own son. This isn't about mistakes, I told them quietly. You deliberately stole money that grandmother left for me, and you used it to enable Jake's criminal behavior. You forged legal documents and lied to my face for years about inheritance that belonged to me. You chose to protect a gambling addict who eventually stole from innocent elderly people. And now you want to characterize systematic fraud as simple mistakes. My mother began crying again, apologizing repeatedly and claiming they had never intended to hurt me. She insisted they had always loved both sons equally, despite overwhelming evidence of favoritism that had shaped every aspect of our family dynamics. My father remained silent until I directly confronted him about the forged documents and stolen trust fund investments. When I placed copies of the fraudulent paperwork in front of him, showing clear differences between my authentic signature and the forgeries he had created, Robert finally acknowledged the full scope of his criminal behavior. I was trying to protect Jake from destroying his life with gambling, he said weakly. I thought if I could cover his debts temporarily, he would get help and stop the destructive behavior. I never imagined it would escalate to embezzling from our clients. His explanation revealed the twisted logic that had justified years of enabling and fraud. Robert had convinced himself that stealing from me to support Jake's addiction was somehow protective parenting rather than criminal behavior that made him an accomplice to increasingly serious crimes. The conversation was interrupted by unexpected noise from the front of the house car door slamming, followed by heavy footsteps on the front porch. Before anyone could respond, Jake burst through the front door carrying a duffel bag and wearing clothes that suggested he had been living rough for several days. His appearance shocked everyone in the dining room. The polished, confident young man who had dominated family gatherings now looked haggard and desperate. His expensive business suits had been replaced by wrinkled jeans and a stained sweatshirt. Dark circles under his eyes and several days of beard growth suggested he had been surviving on minimal sleep and constant stress. Thank God Lucas came back, Jake announced, apparently unaware of the legal proceedings taking place at the dining room table. I knew you would convince him to help us get through this mess. How much money are you lending us, little brother?" The arrogance of his assumption left everyone speechless. Despite being a fugitive facing federal charges for embezzling $300,000 from elderly victims, Jake still expected family resources to rescue him from consequences of his criminal choices. I stood up and faced my brother directly for the first time since discovering the truth about our family's systematic fraud and favoritism. Jake finally noticed the legal documents spread across the table, and Patrick's professional appearance that identified him as my attorney rather than a family ally. "What's going on here?" Jake demanded, his voice carrying the entitled tone that had characterized our entire relationship. "Why are there lawyers and paperwork? We need to focus on getting me out of the country before the FBI tracks me down." His casual admission of plans to flee justice while expecting family assistance proved that Jake had learned nothing from the catastrophic consequences of his criminal behavior. He still believed that being our parents' favorite son entitled him to unlimited support regardless of how his actions affected other people. I picked up the Rolex from his wrist, the same grandfather's watch my parents had presented to him during my birthday humiliation. The timepiece felt heavier than I expected, its gold metal warm from contact with Jake's skin. "You mean this watch?" I asked, holding the Rolex where everyone could see it clearly. "The one that supposedly represents family responsibility and leadership. The one you were wearing while stealing money from elderly people and planning to flee the country." Jake lunged toward me, apparently intending to reclaim the watch by force. But months of construction work and regular gym sessions in Nashville had strengthened my physical capabilities significantly. When Jake grabbed my arm aggressively, I twisted away from his grip and pushed him backwards with enough force to send him stumbling into the dining room wall. "You can't take that watch," Jake shouted, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "Mom and Dad gave it to me because I'm the responsible one in this family. You're just a failed musician who couldn't make it in the real world." His words triggered years of suppressed anger about family dynamics that had privileged his destructive behavior while dismissing my genuine achievements. I realized that Jake truly believed he deserved special treatment despite being a criminal who had betrayed everyone who trusted him. I held Jake against the wall until Patrick could call police to arrest him on the outstanding federal warrant. As we waited for law enforcement to arrive, I explained to my brother exactly what the legal documents on our dining room table represented: evidence that our parents had stolen my inheritance to fund his gambling addiction, proof that years of family favoritism had enabled criminal behavior that ultimately destroyed innocent people's retirement security. Jake's face showed genuine shock as I detailed the financial fraud that had been committed on his behalf. For the first time in his life, he was forced to confront the reality that our parents' protection had come at tremendous cost to other family members and vulnerable victims who had trusted our father's accounting firm with their life savings. When Cleveland police officers arrived to execute the federal arrest warrant, Jake offered no resistance. As they placed handcuffs around his wrists, he looked at me with an expression that finally showed awareness of how completely his privileged position had collapsed. "I never asked them to steal from you," he said quietly, as officers led him toward their patrol car. "I didn't know about grandmother's inheritance or the college fund." His denial might have been truthful, but it also demonstrated how thoroughly he had avoided taking responsibility for consequences that his choices had created for everyone around him. Jake had never questioned where money came from when our parents rescued him from gambling debts and financed his expensive lifestyle. He had simply accepted endless financial support as natural entitlement rather than sacrifice that came at other people's expense. As the police car disappeared down Maple Street, I turned back to my parents and their attorney to finish negotiations that would finally provide justice for 24 years of systematic fraud and favoritism. With Jake in federal custody awaiting trial, My parents could no longer maintain the illusion that family loyalty required protecting him from consequences of his criminal behavior. Robert and Susan faced their own potential prosecution for inheritance fraud, and they needed to focus on avoiding prison sentences rather than enabling their older son's continued destructiveness. Harold Martinez advised his clients to accept full financial restitution rather than risk criminal trial that could result in felony convictions and incarceration. The evidence Patrick had assembled was overwhelming, and federal prosecutors were already investigating whether Robert had been complicit in Jake's embezzlement scheme through inadequate oversight of client accounts. Over the next 2 weeks, we negotiated a comprehensive settlement agreement that addressed every aspect of the financial fraud my parents had committed against me. The final terms required them to liquidate their remaining assets and establish payment schedules that would restore my stolen inheritance, plus accumulated investment returns and legal fees. The agreement included immediate transfer of the family house deed to my name, since its current value approximately equaled the inheritance money they had stolen from grandmother's estate. Robert and Susan would be allowed to remain in the house temporarily while finding alternative living arrangements, but I would own the property and have authority to sell it at my discretion. My parents also surrendered control of any remaining business assets from the accounting firm, including client lists, equipment, and professional licenses that might have residual value despite the criminal scandal. These assets would be liquidated to fund restitution payments to Jake's embezzlement victims, with any remaining proceeds applied to my financial recovery. Patrick had discovered additional fraud involving my college savings account that various relatives and family friends had contributed to during my childhood. Birthday gifts, holiday money and graduation, presents from grandparents, aunts, uncles, and neighbors had accumulated over 18 years into an account containing nearly $40,000 when I graduated from high school. Instead of preserving these funds for their intended educational purpose, my parents had withdrawn the money to pay for Jake's graduate school tuition and expensive lifestyle purchases. They had never told me that relatives had been contributing to my education fund, allowing me to struggle financially through college, while Jake enjoyed family-funded luxury. The settlement required my parents to repay this stolen education fund, with interest bringing the total restitution amount to over $300,000 when combined with grandmother's inheritance trust fund investments and legal fees. They would need to liquidate their retirement savings, sell their remaining possessions, and work regular jobs for several years to fulfill their financial obligations. But the most important aspect of the settlement was a clause that Patrick had insisted upon my parents would provide written confession and apology, acknowledging the full extent of their favoritism and financial fraud. This document would serve as legal protection against future manipulation attempts while forcing them to take explicit responsibility for decades of emotional and financial abuse. Reading their apology letter provided closure that I had never expected to achieve. Robert wrote, "I acknowledge that I systematically favored Jake over Lucas throughout their childhood and adult years, ignoring Lucas's achievements while enabling Jake's destructive behavior. I stole inheritance money that Lucas's grandmother intended for his future, and I used these stolen funds to cover Jake's gambling debts and expensive lifestyle. I forged legal documents and lied to Lucas about his grandmother's wishes. My choices enabled criminal behavior that ultimately harmed innocent elderly victims who trusted our family business with their retirement security. Susan's portion was equally direct. I participated in systematic favoritism that treated Lucas as less important than Jake, despite Lucas's many accomplishments and positive character traits. I knew that Robert was redirecting inheritance money to cover Jake's problems, and I supported these decisions because I wanted to protect Jake from consequences of his choices. I realize now that our favoritism and financial fraud taught Jake that he was entitled to special treatment regardless of how his behavior affected other people. We failed both our sons by creating family dynamics that rewarded dishonesty and irresponsibility, while punishing independence and genuine achievement. The legal resolution also established permanent boundaries around future family contact. My parents could communicate with me only through written messages, and any requests for financial assistance or emotional support would be refused automatically. I was under no obligation to maintain relationships with people who had spent 24 years proving that they valued manipulation over honesty. 6 months after the settlement was finalized, the broader consequences of my family's criminal behavior had reshaped everyone's life circumstances completely. Jake pled guilty to federal embezzlement charges and received a 7-year prison sentence with requirements to pay restitution to his elderly victims upon release. The judge described his crimes as particularly heinous because they had targeted vulnerable people who depended on professional financial services for their survival. Robert lost his accounting license permanently and would never again work in financial services. At 62 years old, he found employment as a bookkeeper for a small retail business earning minimum wage to pay court-ordered restitution and basic living expenses. Susan worked part-time at a department store to contribute to their survival, a dramatic change from her previous life as a successful businessman's wife, with social status and financial security. Their former suburban house, now legally mine, sold quickly to a young family who appreciated its Victorian architecture and established neighborhood. I used the proceeds to pay off remaining legal fees and invest in expanded recording equipment for my growing Nashville music production business. Most importantly, the inheritance recovery allowed me to pursue opportunities that grandmother Eleanor had envisioned when she designated those funds for my career development. I purchased partnership equity in Meridian Recording Studios, becoming co-owner of one of Nashville's most respected independent facilities. Tommy Richardson welcomed my investment and management expertise, recognizing that my business training complemented his technical knowledge perfectly. The irony was striking. My parents had stolen inheritance money intended to fund my dreams, hoping to redirect it toward Jake's criminal activities. But legal action to recover the stolen funds ultimately provided resources that exceeded what grandmother had originally bequeathed, enabling business success that surpassed anything I could have achieved through family connections or favoritism. Sarah supported my decisions throughout the legal process, understanding that establishing justice and accountability was necessary for building healthy relationships moving forward. Our romantic partnership deepened as we planned joint ventures combining her songwriting talents with my production capabilities and studio ownership. But the most satisfying aspect of the resolution was recognition that I had succeeded independently, despite systematic family sabotage, rather than because of parental support and encouragement. Nashville's music community valued merit and collaboration over family pedigree and social status. My technical skills, professional reliability, and creative vision had earned respect and opportunities that no amount of family favoritism could have provided. The final legal hearing took place on a cold February morning in Cleveland's federal courthouse. Judge Patricia Williams reviewed the complete settlement agreement and asked if I was satisfied with the restitution arrangements and accountability measures that had been established. "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. "The settlement provides full financial recovery and ensures that my parents understand the consequences of their choices. I don't expect reconciliation with people who spent decades proving they value dishonesty over family relationships, but I'm satisfied that justice has been served." Judge Williams noted that family financial fraud cases often involved complex emotional manipulation that made victims reluctant to pursue legal remedies. She commended my courage in holding family members accountable for criminal behavior, emphasizing that blood relationships never justify theft or systematic abuse. As I left the courthouse, I realized that the birthday humiliation that had driven me from Cleveland 8 months earlier had ultimately freed me from toxic family dynamics that would have continued limiting my potential indefinitely. Being ignored and dismissed had forced me to develop independence and self-reliance that enabled genuine success on my own terms. 2 years have passed since I walked out of my childhood home, carrying nothing but determination to build an authentic life, free from family dysfunction and manipulation. Nashville has become more than just my home. It represents everything I learned about the difference between earned respect and inherited entitlement, between genuine relationships and obligations disguised as family loyalty. My recording studio partnership with Tommy Richardson has exceeded every expectation we set when I invested my recovered inheritance in Meridian Recordings expansion. We now operate 3 professional facilities serving everyone from emerging indie artists to established country stars planning major label releases. My technical expertise, combined with business training, has helped us navigate industry changes while maintaining the creative focus that originally attracted me to Nashville's music community. Last month, we completed production on an album featuring Sarah's original compositions, showcasing the folk rock style she has developed over 3 years of intensive songwriting and performance. The project represents our first major collaboration as both romantic and creative partners, combining her lyrical storytelling with my technical knowledge to create something neither could have achieved independently. The album's lead single reached number 20 on independent country charts, earning Sarah management attention from several Nashville agencies and opening opportunities for touring that will establish her as a serious recording artist. Watching her succeed through talent and perseverance, rather than family connections, reminds me constantly why leaving Cleveland was the healthiest decision I ever made. My parents fulfill their financial obligations through monthly restitution payments that will continue for another 4 years. Robert works double shifts at the bookkeeping job, while Susan contributes income from retail employment that barely covers their basic survival needs. They live in a small rental apartment near the suburbs, where they once owned a house worth more than most people earn in 5 years of honest work. Their letters arrive punctually with restitution checks, always including requests for reconciliation and forgiveness, that I file without response. Robert writes about his remorse for enabling Jake's criminal behavior and stealing my inheritance, while Susan describes her loneliness and desire to rebuild family relationships through gradual contact and shared activities. But their appeals for resumed contact always focus on their emotional needs rather than demonstrating understanding of how their choices affected my development and future opportunities. They want forgiveness to restore their comfort level, not accountability that addresses systematic favoritism and financial fraud. Maintaining boundaries protects my mental health while ensuring they continue facing consequences for 24 years of destructive family dynamics. Jake serves his federal prison sentence at a minimum security facility in southern Ohio, where he participates in addiction counseling and financial responsibility programs designed to address the gambling behaviors that led to his criminal activity. His letters forwarded through the court system express regret for disappointing the family and gratitude for my decision not to pursue additional charges related to assault and theft. His communications reveal ongoing self-centeredness that suggests rehabilitation programs have not fundamentally changed his character. Jake writes about his plans for rebuilding relationships after release, assuming that family members will welcome him back despite betrayals that destroyed innocent people's financial security. He appears to view prison time as temporary inconvenience, rather than consequences for choices that reflected years of entitled thinking and moral blindness. I maintain minimal contact with him through brief responses that acknowledge his letters without encouraging extended correspondence. Jake needs to demonstrate genuine change through actions over many years before any family relationship becomes possible. Currently, his focus remains on managing his own circumstances rather than understanding how his behavior affected victims and family members who trusted him. The inheritance money that grandmother Eleanor intended for my career development has funded opportunities that exceed anything she could have imagined when writing her will. Studio ownership provides creative fulfillment while generating profits that allow reinvestment in additional equipment and facility expansion. My reputation within Nashville's music industry continues growing through collaborations with talented artists who value technical expertise and professional reliability. Most importantly, I have learned to trust relationships built on mutual respect and shared values rather than biological connections that carry expectations of automatic loyalty. Sarah Tommy and our extended music community provide emotional support and encouragement that my biological family never offered during 24 years of systematic favoritism and neglect. Our engagement last month represents commitment to building a future based on honest communication and shared dreams, rather than manipulation and competitive dynamics that characterized my childhood experiences. Sarah appreciates my quiet strength and creative vision, while I admire her fearless pursuit of artistic expression despite industry pressures to compromise her authentic voice for commercial success. Wedding planning has become a celebration of how two independent people can create partnership without sacrificing individual identity or creative ambitions. We are designing ceremonies and receptions that reflect our musical backgrounds while honoring the Nashville community that welcomed us both during transitional periods when family support was unavailable. The greatest satisfaction comes from recognizing that being ignored and dismissed by my family created opportunities to develop genuine self-reliance and authentic relationships that serve me far better than inherited privilege ever could have. Jake's advantages came with obligations to maintain family reputation and expectations that ultimately limited his ability to make independent moral choices. My disadvantages forced me to create value through talent and character, rather than depending on family connections and unearned support. Business success built through my own efforts feels more rewarding than anything I could have inherited from my father's accounting firm or family real estate holdings. Recording artists hire my services because of technical competence and creative vision, not because of family name recognition or inherited business relationships. The respect I have earned within Nashville's music community reflects genuine accomplishments rather than social status transferred from previous generations. Looking back on the birthday humiliation that drove me from Cleveland, I realize my parents gave me an unexpected gift through their systematic rejection and favoritism. Being forced to leave home at 24 led directly to discovering my true potential and finding a community that valued my contributions. If they had treated me fairly, I might have remained trapped in family dynamics that rewarded conformity over creativity and obligation over authentic achievement. The family dysfunction that seemed so devastating during my childhood and adolescence ultimately prepared me for independence that most people never develop. Learning to trust my own judgment rather than seeking external validation has enabled business decisions and creative choices that might have seemed too risky if I had grown up with safety nets and automatic support systems. Sometimes healing means accepting that some relationships cannot be repaired because they were fundamentally unhealthy from the beginning. My biological family operated through manipulation, favoritism, and financial fraud disguised as love and protection. Those patterns would have continued indefinitely if Jake's criminal behavior had not finally created consequences that forced everyone to confront reality about our toxic family dynamics. True family consists of people who celebrate your achievements, support your dreams, and treat you with respect even during disagreements and difficult periods. Sarah Tommy and our Nashville music community provide emotional connections that my biological relatives never offered, despite 24 years of shared history and genetic similarity. As I write this reflection in my studio office, surrounded by gold records and industry awards that represent collaborative successes with talented artists, I feel deep gratitude for the painful experiences that led me to discover my authentic life purpose. Being ignored taught me to value myself independently. Being dismissed taught me to trust my own instincts. Being stolen from taught me to protect my resources and establish boundaries with people who demonstrate selfish motivations. The journey from invisible son to respected music producer required confronting hard truths about family relationships that many people spend lifetimes avoiding. But facing those realities directly has provided freedom and success that would have been impossible while maintaining illusions about unconditional family love and support. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us most create the biggest obstacles to our happiness and success. I would love to hear your thoughts about family relationships and setting healthy boundaries in the comments below. If this story resonated with your own experiences, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family dysfunction and building authentic relationships. Share this story with anyone who might be struggling with similar challenges, because sometimes we all need reminders that our worth is not determined by how our families treat us. Thank you for listening to my story about discovering that real family is found in people who genuinely support your dreams, rather than those who happen to share your DNA. I hope my journey from ignored son to independent success inspires you to trust your own path, even when the people closest to you cannot see your potential. Remember that being overlooked often means you are free to become exactly who you were meant to be, without limitations imposed by others' expectations or favoritism.